Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Larry Richert and Dr. Mike Hutchinson, the animal doctor. Animal General, here he is.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. That was very kind. Just a quick story before Larry gets up here. One of my plagues is that when I go out and speak, I'm blessed. I get to go around the world and talk about stem cells to people like yourselves, to high school students, advanced biology high school students, to my colleagues, veterinarians, to MDs, and to PhDs. And the worst thing they can do to me is limit my time, because it's like a nightmare. I want to share everything. And
1 minute remaining in the third period. 1 minute. That's why I'm here, Doc.
So I'm going to do my best to share this world with you. And I know there's going to be questions. I may not hit the specific topic you want, but I'll hang out. I'll give you information if you want to email me. And I'll share as much as I can about this world, because you're going to be amazed at what's coming.
So, hi. The worst part of my job is the 3 a.m. wake up. Immediately followed by the best part of my job, which is meeting really interesting and amazing people like Dr. Mike. Thank you. Dr. Mike had a veterinary clinic on Long Island. He's from a place called Sarah, Pennsylvania, near the New York, Pennsylvania border. And in 1999, he claims that Pittsburgh was so friendly that he and his wife decided to move here to raise their children and have a practice. We discovered Dr. Mike by an article in the newspaper about this vet who was treating pet rats, the rat doctor. Naturally, we got to talk to this guy. Who has rats for pets? Does anyone here have a rat for pets? Exactly. But the excitement and joy of Doc talking about how smart these rats were and really what great pets they made. And then it just morphed into this tremendous relationship that still exists today. Tomorrow morning at 7:38, we have a weekly visit with Dr. Mike, and he provides us with questions that he gets, and tremendous Q&A live, and his bedside manner when I heard him on the radio taking phone calls from people. Clearly somebody that's very passionate about what they do. And I always said you can tell a lot about a person by the way they treat animals and children when they don't think anybody's looking. So the passion that he has extends way beyond just regular practice of being a vet. He was the first one that told us about the stem cell technology that first in the animal world was more advanced because of the complications of the FDA and the human side. But we knew, and he told us for many years, what was to come, what's already transpired now. It's come to fruition and has been a game changer for not only people's pets, but obviously for people too. And what's to come in the near future is also going to be amazing. So without further ado, my very good friend, Dr. Mike Hutchinson of Animal General, LaSalle Plaza Cranberry. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm humbled, Larry. I'm truly humbled that he agreed to come here, knowing that he gets up at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock every morning, and he's spending an evening with us and sharing this time with me. I'm honored. I truly am. You're my brother. So tell you a quick story, just real quick about the rats. This isn't about stem cells, but I told them, and they started laughing. They said, you made fun of yourself on the air. And I said, well, I thought it was funny. I took the New York State boards first because I was working in Long Island, and they put you through 2 days of testing, and at the time, back in 1986, and the last part of it is miscellaneous animals. So I was ready for monkeys, I was ready for weeds, I was ready for poisonous plants, whatever they're going to throw at me, I was ready for it, except rats. And of course, they threw rats at me, and I was thinking, who works on rats? I said, for crying out loud, I'd get my cat out. And I wasn't kidding. And I failed it miserably. I got 1 question right, which was the sex of the rat, out of 10. But luckily, the rest of the miscellaneous part, I got high enough to get my score up above a 70 on that division, so I did get my license. But I didn't think I was going to get it after leaving there. You know, you get one question right out of 10, you think it's over. You got to wait 6 months to take it again. I told my wife I'm not going to be out of practice for 6 months. I don't know what I'm going to do. I had a lot of debt. Nobody paid my way. I was paying my own way. But when I found out I passed, I was exceedingly happy. But when I got back to the practice, I said to the doctor, I said, who in the world works on rats? And he looked at me and he said, we do. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, we do. People have these fancy rats, and they love them to death, and you've got to know about them. So then, 1986, I started reading about rats. And you find out that just about every medicine that's out there started on rats, for humans, started on rats in laboratory. So there's enormous amounts of information. So by when I met Larry and John, I was named Rat Veterinarian of the Year. And now they named the world Rat Veterinarian of the World after me, which I think is hysterical. And it was all because I failed that test when I started. So I didn't always know about them. So stem cells, we get into the stem cells, it's just a repair cell. And I know there's some people in here that probably had a treatment and mixed results or maybe very good results. Well, I've treated over 1,000 animals. I'm also on 2 human boards. I've been asked to be on advisory boards. One of them, I'm chairman of the board. And we're actually, not me, but we're actually giving stem cells to patients with osteoarthritis here in the Pittsburgh area. And we're going to soon be doing it in other parts of the United States under the Health and Human Services Department to collect data to hopefully get medical reimbursement for it so that people can have insurance cover it. Right now it's patient funded. And it's this repair cell, and when I talk, people come up and say, well, I had the bone marrow, I had the amniotic cells, I had the umbilical cord cells, it didn't work or whatever, and it frustrates me because I think sometimes people ride on the coattails of the research that was done in the early part of this century and don't necessarily represent all of the facts to the people before they treat them. So I've sat down with human doctors, and when we start talking, they start taking notes. They go, I didn't know that, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. And I said, but you're telling me you're treating patients. And that frustrates me because I would be deathly afraid to treat a patient with stem cells if I didn't know what the reasonable expectation is.
Well, let's start, Doc, by explaining that when people hear stem cells, that's really an umbrella of a lot of different, and a lot of people have a concern about where they come from.
And that's right. So you can get them from the embryonic stem cells, and we're not using those. We can get them from fat. We can get them from bone marrow. We can get them from any tissue in the body. But there's bucket loads of them in the fat. And when you can get bucket loads of cells from the fat, it's very easy to get. Just think about how much fat's thrown away every year from liposuction and things like that. And they have all of this repair capability. Wherever our blood goes, there's repair cells. Our body's an amazing organism, and it can repair itself for most of our life. When we're born, we start off up here, and the day we're born, we start off in this programmed cell death until we die. And we call that apoptosis. It's just programmed cell death. It's degeneration. So we all age, we start to degenerate as we get older. Well, we're not trying to reverse that line. We're not trying to reverse time. We're trying to interrupt that line and maybe take us back in a knee or a microenvironment like a hip or a shoulder or a heart. We're trying to take it back to a time when we were younger. We're trying to repair it, not fill it in with scar tissue. We're trying to get it to regenerate, get the body to regenerate. And there's so much evidence around the world that we can do that with so many diseases. With my own eyes, I've seen spinal cord regrown. With my own eyes, there's several people alive right now had tumors removed in their windpipe, and they used to get a little plastic insert to replace it. You've seen that. And the people usually die of aspiration pneumonia. They can't, even with a little 5-inch segment, they can't get the phlegm out of their lung. They have to be suctioned. And we were regenerating it with a scaffold, seeding it with stem cells, growing it in sheep 4 years ago, and now there's a little girl alive, that just a 2-year-old girl that just had it done. They just had a big publicity thing about it, and she's alive because they were able to regenerate her trachea. And that's pretty neat. You're thinking you can regenerate trachea? When I would go to high schools, I would say, how many kids in here believe that in 10 years we'll be able to regenerate a limb? Every hand went up. This is advanced biology in high schools around here, 9th to 12th grade. Every hand. When I go in front of 300 of my colleagues and I say, how many people in this room believe in 10 years we'll be able to regenerate a limb? I get 2 hands up. Literally, they don't believe it. And guess what? June 15th, they published a paper that they believe they'll be regenerating a human limb within 7 years here in the United States. And I know that. I've already seen them regenerate muscle, tendon, bone, the circulatory system, the intestines, full thickness, native tissue, cartilage, meniscus. All of these things they are able to regenerate in a lab. You've all heard about 3D printing.
Switch this out. Sorry.
All right. That's all right. You've all heard about 3D printing, and now they can take a meniscus in your knee. They're doing this at Columbia University in New York City. They're doing it at Kansas State University. So the translational model before it gets into people is usually sheep because they're about the same size as a meniscus. So they take a CAT scan or an MRI, and they take a 3D image of it. They print it out with a scaffold that under a microscope, a scanning electron microscope, it looks like a spider web of fibers, of nanofibers. One nanofiber is about 1/200th the width of a human hair. They seed it with a person's own stem cells, so there's no rejection. They grow the meniscus, and they put it back and replace the meniscus with a natural meniscus. I graduated in '86. That was impossible. We were taught that when you lose part of your meniscus, it's gone. And now it's different. And so that's why I'm so passionate, because I'm privileged. I get to go in and see this with my own eyes. And when you see this with your own eyes, I have to get out here and share it. I have to come out and tell people about it. And they always say, "You're so passionate." And I said, it's happening. I get to see this. I don't care what you hear. This is coming soon to the United States. They're doing it in Bangkok, in 5-star hospitals there. You can eat off the floors. They're all board-certified doctors from the United States. Medical tourism, because the FDA is behind the times. They're doing it in Japan. It's approved in Japan. They're doing it in Australia. They're now doing it in India. We just got technology we're using in Pittsburgh approved in India, so their insurance companies are paying.
Let's talk about athletes, the high-level athletes. These were, Olympic athletes, and there's a lot of money at stake for these athletes. In joints, obviously, are one of the key areas, especially knees.
Yeah.
And this is happening now.
Well, they have the access monetarily,
Right.
So they will go places. You've all heard of Tiger Woods. You've all heard of Peyton Manning. Maybe you've heard of Bartolo Colon. He was a Cy Young Award winner pitcher for the Yankees back in 2005 or 6. And then he couldn't play for 3-4 years. Couldn't throw his fastball anymore because of his elbow and his shoulder. He went down to a friend that I know well. He's a medical doctor. They treated him with stem cells, and he went back to the pros for 5 more years. He got a $12 million contract with the Yankees. He was throwing 95 miles an hour again. And his fastball, and when you think about that, at that level to put him back, I got invited out to Lexington as a guest for a racehorse. And they were going to give this poor horse, had got a MRSA infection in its knee, destroyed the knee. Very, very fancy horse. Had a breeding fee of about $110,000. And normally that horse would just get put down. So I'm standing in the back listening to the board-certified docs say that they could do surgery and drill out the lesions. They could do this, 50-50 chance of getting it back in the pasture. And then they were talking about we could inject it with corticosteroids, 50-50 chance of making it feel better. Nobody was talking about getting it back to racing. And I'm just standing in the back, and the owner looks around, and she was a farm lady. I grew up on a farm background. And she says, well, I want to know what Dr. Mike would do. And I said, I would do stem cells. And she goes, well, that's what I want to do. 5 months later, that racehorse sold for $210,000 in the Keeneland sale. And with radiographs and that full history known, nobody could hide that history when you're selling a horse for that much money, and passed every veterinary exam. And I had the digital radiographs each month that I shared around the world. So when veterinarians would say, oh, this is hogwash, this is hocus pocus, this is voodoo, this is snake oil, and I'd show the x-rays, they'd all just be quiet looking at them. Really? What did you do? And I said, you got to take a look at this. And now there's 10,000 veterinarians around the world getting the same results I'm getting here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is pretty neat.
In Dubai, the ruler of Dubai wanted to meet you, and you have to tell the story because in their world, they have billions of dollars, so money doesn't mean the same, because money doesn't mean the same to us. They have billions. Yeah. So what they do is they race thoroughbreds and they race camels.
Yes.
And they have the same issues, and that's why they wanted to meet you. You got to tell them about meeting the ruler of Dubai years ago because of the stem cells.
I get invited over, and I don't know who the ruler of Dubai is. I mean, why would I? I'm not from the Middle East. I was kind of not really wanting to go over to the Middle East, and you know why. But when the ruler invites you and everybody's saying, you got to go, Dr. Mike, and they treat you very well, and I got over there, they wanted to put up a lab. Now, in the United States, we have one lab in Lexington where you can preserve these cells in animals, preserve them forever for the animal's life through cryopreservation. So you take a sample. I could take a sample from your dog tomorrow and treat it tomorrow, and then send the rest of the cells to be preserved in vials that we could use the rest of the dog's life. We might get 2 vials, we might get 3 vials, we might get 6 vials. Well, we have one lab in America that services the United States for the veterinary market. Over there, they have 3 labs now, and I was part of all 3 labs because they're jealous of each other, and they're an hour apart, and you had to see it. I went out to the desert, and meeting with him, and he said, I'd like to try it, but we're using a technology from England, and I explained the differences. I got very excited about it, and I said, look, this is way better, and here's why. Well, he has 12 veterinarians lined up in the room with me that are his veterinarians. And he turns to one of them, the chief veterinarian, and they said, well, what about this? And it almost got into, not an argument, I was just sharing information. I found out later that I embarrassed him, and I didn't mean to do that.
They were beheaded, but
Yeah. So, and,
well, it wasn't your fault. Don't feel bad. You really didn't mean it to show them up like that. But I mean, when you met the ruler and he said, you didn't even think you'd have a chance to even speak.
no, they told me we'd have 15 minutes. He'd walk in a room, and if he decided he had to leave, and he'd just get up and leave. If he wasn't interested, he'd get up and leave. And the company says to me, Dr. Mike, don't start talking. And I said, well, don't take me in the room. And if he asks me a question, I have to answer him. And so I went in the room, and he decided on the spot. 45 minutes later, he wanted to put up a lab. I went back, got invited back 6 weeks later. I go back there, was desert. 6 weeks later, it's beautiful grass, beautiful buildings, air conditioning, a falconry. I'm like, aren't we in the same place? Wasn't this a desert? They said, oh, yeah, they had this built while I was away. I mean, beautiful lab, one of the nicest labs I had seen.
Tell me about the ruler part.
Yeah. So he says to me, Dr. Mike, I'd like to try this. And he said, and I want to thank you for coming over and sharing this technology. And he said, and if the horses do well and the camels do well, and then he leans up, he says, I am Sheikh Mohammed Maktoum. If I benefit, you benefit greatly. And I said, well, thank you, Your Highness. And I said, that's very kind. And we walked away, and I told Larry about that, and he says, hey, can we get a T-shirt? And
That's the golden ticket.
Yeah.
When the ruler of Dubai goes, if I benefit, you benefit greatly, Dr. Mike.
So,
You're still waiting for the check, though.
yeah.
Just
Exactly.
put it on. But their technology is advanced in that regard.
It's amazing. And so I was the first one to take it out of camel fat. The hump is where you get the fat. And we were able to show that we could get the stem cells. Yeah, one hump. The racing camels, they're small, they're thin, they race. It's unbelievable. They're like 6-mile races. And they sit there with a robot on them that has a paddle that goes around, and they have a little track around it, concrete track that they get in their fancy automobiles, and they're using a little, like a video game operator, and they're making it go faster or slower to make the camel go faster or slower, and that's how they do it. And they used to have children on that, but the poor children from India were getting sterile from bumping on the camels, so the world didn't like that, so they changed it to the robots. It was kind of neat.
But the stem cell technology, and you work with some docs out of Australia. And so outside the United States, they're more advanced.
It's amazing. And like I said, in Australia, there's 2 doctors. I was privileged to speak to one of the kind of godfathers of stem cells last night for 2 hours out of the blue. He called me and said, hey, do you have 5 minutes? I was captivated for 2 hours. What we're going to have shortly for treatment on the anti-aging side. But let me get to some of those treatments, because I want to share a story with you. And none of you probably heard things like this, but we had a dog. The lady lived in Virginia, and the dog fell 18 inches. It was a freak accident, fell over a fence. It was a King Charles Cavalier, a small dog, but it was a top breeding dog. It was 2.5 years old, and it broke its back. Instantly, the spinal cord, the head's here, the tail's over here. the spinal cord went in a Z. It didn't sever it, but the bone broke down and it was in a Z. The dog yelped and was immediately paralyzed in the back legs. Its penis was hanging out. It couldn't urinate on its own. She rushed it to an ER in Maryland, and the neurosurgeon there said, $11,000, I can stabilize it, but the dog's never going to walk again, and it's never going to urinate on its own, and you're going to have to get a cart for it, and you're going to have to learn how to express its bladder, and we might have to amputate the penis because it's going to dry out. And she said, well, can I charge that? Can I charge part of that because I don't have $11,000? They sent her down the road, I don't know, 5-6 hours to the University of North Carolina Veterinary School, where they stabilized the fracture. The neurosurgeon there told them the same thing. And they stabilized it, did a beautiful job. The dog was paralyzed, and she found me through some circuitous route. And you remember a few years back, 60 Minutes had a show on stem cells where they said some quack in Mexico or something used placenta and killed a person by administering it, saying it was a stem cell treatment. Well, it was just after that. And I said to the lady, I would love to treat your dog. The dog's name was Timmy. I said, since you have CAT scans, MRIs, they stabilized it, there's a neurosurgeon involved. And I said, but the neurosurgeon has to approve it. And she said, why? It's my dog. And I said, because of that program, I don't want them to think there's some quack veterinarian up in Pittsburgh, because your dog could die while we're administering cells. And so she agreed to come up, well, she agreed to let me get on the phone. The neurosurgeon said, Mike, you should wait 6 months. And I was at my practice, I was busy, and I put the phone out and I put it back, and I wanted to remain polite. And I said, why would I wait 6 months? And they said, so you know 100% sure that Timmy's paralyzed. And I said, oh, okay. Sally, when can you bring Timmy up? And then the intern spoke up and said, Dr. Mike, if Timmy walks again, you can't say it's the stem cells that did that. And I said, okay, well, Sally, when can you bring Timmy up? I'm a clinician, I'm not a researcher. So she said, I can be up there in 2 days. So 8 days after they stabilized it, I took fat from Timmy. We put him under anesthesia, took a little bit of fat. We treated him. We gave it into the cerebral spinal space, the fluid. We gave it into the muscles around the injury, and we gave it intravenously. We got 6 bank doses. We did that treatment again in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and a month later. So a total of 4 treatments with that exact same protocol. When they came back for the 4th treatment, my text, Timmy was scared, he was afraid, he didn't know who we were, had fear in his eyes, and we all felt sorry for him. We all love dogs in my practice. The legs started to move, he had some feeling, and this was dead. I mean, there was no movement. She was going to physical therapists 3-4 times a week to be instructed how to keep the muscles developed. When that dog had feeling in its legs on the 4th injection, my tech just started crying. I mean, you can only imagine. The dog loved us at this point. You know, he knew everybody there was friendly, and we didn't hurt him that he knew. He was under anesthesia. And we're all just sitting there, including me, thinking, my gosh, I have never seen this in my career. I used to be an ER doc for 7.5 years in New York. I was a head doctor in a very, very busy emergency clinic. I've seen way over 100 spinal trauma cases where the neurosurgeon said they'd never walk again, and I never got to see the miracle. They never walked again. And I think the neurosurgeons are very, very good at their job, but they don't use stem cells. They use corticosteroids, they use surgery, they use a couple things. You have to do the surgery, but they don't have anything that would stimulate, hopefully, regeneration. 5 months later, and we have video evidence of this, I presented it at a North American Research Conference, and 5 months later, Timmy's running around breeding, peeing on his own, and he still had neurologic deficits, but he's a new dog. He has feeling again, and he's starting to function normal. So then I got asked to present it down at this North American Research Conference in Atlanta, and I didn't want to go because it was all PhDs, and I said, they're just going to say it's anecdotal and this and that. I worked in research for 5 years. I'm not a cynic, but I didn't want to waste my time. And shame on me, because I went down and I showed the videos. It was a 20-minute breakout session. I showed them the videos of Timmy during, and the owner was taking very good videos of her dog throughout this process. When he was walking, I turned to look, and the people in the audience a lot of them were crying because they saw it, and I remembered right then. I said, look, everybody has pets. It's not just us, crazy vets. It's not just, us crazy dog. They have vets too, or they have pets too. And then I said, listen, the neurosurgeon said to me correctly that I couldn't claim that this stem cells did this for Timmy. But I'm going to say this. Timmy's happy, Sally's happy, and I'm happy. That's 3 good things. Number 4, we have to take a further look. We can't ignore this. None of us in this room, all of the researchers, we haven't seen this before. It's way more than the bottom of the pyramid. So we have to take a further look. I got a standing ovation. The last person to shake my hand, it was right before lunch, he says, Mike, I'm the dumb SOB who told you to wait 6 months. And I said, no, doctor, you were right. And he goes, this is amazing. We have to share it with the world. Now there's quadriplegics, athletes that have had physical therapy and the standard of care in the United States for a year that have gone over to South Korea, had their own stem cells given to them, and they're getting use of their limbs. Not full use, but it's life-changing, and nobody hears about it. Nobody hears about it. And why? I don't want to get conspiratorial, but it's probably follow the money. And the pharmaceutical companies have multi-billion-dollar industries selling drugs, and they don't want to give that up easily. They want to get stem cells in a vial so that they can give them to us. And I think that will come. But I would rather have my own stem cells if they're functional, because my body isn't going to reject them. There's no chance to reject them. I'd rather give a dog or a cat or a horse or a camel their own stem cells, and we call that autologous, and that's what I'd like to do. So
the natural question is, if you had a pet and you had certain issues, maybe not certainly to the severity with Timmy, but as dogs age, obviously their joints and limbs become problematic in many cases. What would it cost today to do a treatment like that?
2008 was the first dog. I love that question. First dog that I treated, and her name was Maggie, and it was a mixed Labrador Retriever, and she was overweight, and the owner brought her into my office. I'd just gotten trained in doing the stem cells, and I wasn't doing them in my hospital yet. I had to send the fat out and have it come back processed, and now I do it in-house, which is great. But Maggie was laying on the floor, and I walked in the room, and the owner was sobbing when I got in the room. I never met him. And she was crying. She never even met me, Larry. It was like, I got in the room and I said, what are you crying for? And then I was in my mind thinking, heck, you don't even know me and you're already crying. And she
I get that a lot.
Yeah. And she says, well, Dr. Mike, I don't want you to say no to me about treating my dog. And I said, why would I say no? And I said, I'm curious, why would I say no? And she said, because Maggie is almost 12 years old. I know she may not have another year in her life. I know she's at her life expectancy. I know she's overweight, but I want to try. And she couldn't walk in my office without assistance. Because I had a tile floor, and she couldn't stand on it. We had to lift her up, and she was overweight. And this poor wife couldn't lift Maggie up herself either. Maggie failed to respond to the standard of care, which was eventually corticosteroids. She was getting bloody diarrhea from it, unfortunately. And so she wanted to try it. And I said, well, I'm here to see if I think Maggie's a reasonable candidate, and if I agree with your veterinarian, because she brought x-rays and blood tests. So luckily, when I examined Maggie, I agreed with her veterinarian that that's what was wrong, that it was just arthritis. And this dog was in pain and couldn't stand up. So I said, I think she's a very good candidate. And I treated her. I had an intern from Purdue who's now a veterinarian at my practice, but at the time he was an intern, and he never heard of stem cells. At 14 days, I wasn't expecting Maggie to be walking or anything like that. I figured maybe in 30 to 60 days we could help her a lot. He went in to take the sutures out and from the surgery where I collected the fat, and I was finishing up a dog surgery, and he comes in the back, and he's a big man, and I see the side of him, and he's just shaking his head like he's disappointed. I said, Mark, what happened? And he said, you should see Maggie. And I said, my God, I was putting the last suture in. I got done. I said, what happened to Maggie? He said, go in the room and see Maggie. She had her front feet on the exam table. She walked in the door 14 days later. And I didn't expect that. The owner didn't expect that. And that was the first dog I treated. And I had never seen that in my life, and neither have my colleagues. I have now done over 1,000 cases, and I promise you, if that didn't work on my first 2 cases, if it didn't work on Maggie, I would have tried it again thinking it was me not picking the right case. If it didn't work on the second case, I would have given up. And that's the truth. I've done over 1,000 cases because of those stories. I get more hugs from giving stem cells to animals than anything I've ever done in my career. And I've been a vet 32 years. So it's that got me doing it in animals. And now I treat osteoarthritis as a given. It's a very reasonable outcome. But now I have people coming from all over. And veterinarians can do this, but they're not comfortable. Not everybody's comfortable giving an injection into the spinal fluid. And they come from all over for things like Lou Gehrig's dogs get it too. For things like wobblers or disc disease, we're treating them. And we have studies right now going on here in Pittsburgh for humans with osteoarthritis with reasonable expectations. I have 264 patients from Australia that are almost at 3 years post stem cell treatment. Every one of them was a candidate for a knee replacement. This was knees. And the data that we have statistically analyzed by the statistician, 99.9% confidence interval, these people are as good at almost 3 years, as good or better than the knee replacement patients. So what does that tell you? You can go into an office, they can take a little fat from the sedation and a block, a mini lipo, from our side, our love handle, or the back of our rear end, and it takes them about 15, 20 minutes. Then they process it, and you wait for them to process. Then they come back, they inject the bad joints, or joint, if it's one joint, and then you leave. And you're walking out, and you're starting physical therapy. And 2 to 3 years later, those people are doing better or as well as people that got their knee chopped off. And so what does that tell you? We should have this option. We should have this ability ourselves to have our insurance company pay for that. They'll save money. So there's an FDA fight right now, and again, I don't want to be, talking about the all these conspiracy theories, but it's all follow the money, but it's going to happen. The waterfall has started, and right now the FDA and pharmaceutical companies are putting blocks in with their finger. They're not going to stop what's coming because too many people around the world are seeing this, and the reports are the adverse events are insignificant from getting your own stem cells, which is pretty neat.
So back to the average cost for a pet.
Apologize. So it started off in 2008. When I treated Maggie, it was about $3,200. We had to send it out to California to get processed. Now the technology has evolved. It's like the new cell phone. And so today the cost for that same procedure is about $1,800. It's still expensive, but it's coming down. And we hope that with economies of scale, I'll tell you this, that the insurance companies on the pet side are covering this already. The 5, 6 major insurance companies are covering it. What does that tell you? They're saving money. And so that that's going to happen for us. It's just a matter of when the pharmaceutical companies can make money with it, you'll see it become mainstream. But I like everybody to know about it, though, so they can ask about it and watch the space and ask questions. If you have a loved one or it's you, I can send you to people you can talk to and get all your even a website and see if you qualify if it's your own issue. So it's pretty neat stuff.
And when do you expect it to be practical on the human side? I know they are doing it. It's extremely expensive, and it's not covered as far as I know now by insurance.
Correct. It's about $7,000 in humans. Depending where you go, there might be some people that say they're giving a stem cell treatment and they're taking bone marrow. Now, bone marrow doesn't have a lot of stem cells in it that we want. The king of the hill for stem cells is called an MSC. Mike's special cell. But an MSC comes from our connective tissue, and so it's very good to put into joints, connective tissues, ligaments, bone, joints, fat. And so the MSCs, a cup of fat has, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of stem cells in it. A cup of bone marrow, when you're 8 years old, might have 1 million MSCs. It has a lot of other blood types of stem cells, but MSCs has about 1 million. So to get up to a therapeutic dose, they have to culture them and grow more. And that can take 6 weeks, and the FDA said, nope, can't do that until you do the studies. I agree with this, by the way, because those cells can mutate when they're being cultured and they're being grown. They can get bigger. So they have to regulate that. So some people came out and said, well, we want to do a same-day procedure. We're going to take about 60 cc's of bone marrow from you, and they're doing this in Pittsburgh, and they're going to take 60 cc's of bone marrow, and then they're going to spin it down, harvest out what they believe are the nucleated MSCs, and I agree with them that they're getting some of them, and then they're going to inject them into your joint in a same-day procedure. Well, if you were 8 years old and there was 1 million in a cup's about, 260 cc's of blood or bone marrow. They're taking out 60. So maybe if you're 8 years old, there's 200,000. Guess what happens when that 8-year-old turns 60? There's probably 1,000, 2,000. The numbers decrease as we age. In fat, they decrease as well, but we have so many more that we get therapeutic doses out of the fat even as we age, which is pretty neat.
What about any applications for cancer?
Great question. So right now they're doing research. University of Modena in Italy, Dr. Dominici, I got to sit next to him in a talk out at Brown University in Texas. And they took a patient. I had a dear friend die at 36 of malignant melanoma. And he shows a patient that they went in operatively. He's an MD and a researcher. They went in to operate, and the poor soul had a malignant melanoma. It looked like an octopus going around the spinal cord. They didn't give him much time with the standard of care. But they gave him a choice to be part of this compassionate use like we did for Timmy. That was complete compassionate use. We didn't charge for that. So they offered this man that, and he picked it. He wanted to have the stem cells. They linked the stem cells from fat with a natural tumor killer that's in the body, but the tumor rejects it somehow. It evades it somehow. The tumors are very, very smart. But if we could get that factor into the tumor, we could kill the tumor. Well, the stem cells home in on inflammation like a guided missile. So they linked it to the stem cells, injected it into the patient. We saw 68 days later, they went to do surgery. That octopus looked like a silver dollar above the spinal cord. They removed it. And the last I spoke to Dr. Dominici, that man was cancer-free 4 years later. Wow. It's incredible. And pancreatic cancer, they're doing it in guinea pig models right now. Same man, Dr. Dominici. There's a lot of others doing it, but he shares information with me because I met him and we became friends. So that's what I mean. I'm blessed. I get some of this information. Stay tuned. I'm not treating cancer in my practice yet because I don't have that technology of linking those. But I think it's not hard. I've seen it done. It's not hard. It's just that one day we'll have the equipment, and hopefully we'll put up a lab here in Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh will be one of the hubs, and there'll be other areas around the United States that will offer this therapy. And the animals, the dogs, the cats, the horses, the camels are the translational model for us people. So there's hope. We're turning the immune system against cancer, immunotherapy, that's one thing. Now we may be able to use a repair cell that homes in on inflammation, and cancer is inflammation, and we may be able to treat the cancer. And people, it sounds crazy when you hear doctors and veterinarians saying it treats so many diseases. How's that possible? Well, I was doing a podcast with Dr. Neil Riordan, who's a brilliant scientist, and he summed it up perfectly. I said, boy, I'm going to steal that from you. That was well explained. He said, as we age, we all have underlying conditions that are related either to inflammation or our immune system going awry or just degeneration. We're aging and we're breaking down. The stem cells function, the MSC, they secrete a whole bunch of things that, one, reduce inflammation dramatically, and it lasts. And two, they modulate the immune system. There's two parts of the immune system. It modulates both sides in a very positive manner. If our immune system's overreactive, like Crohn's disease or some kind of allergic type disease, it brings it down. If it's underactive, it brings it up. And then it does the possibility of secreting things that will regenerate tissue or cause the tissues around it to regenerate meniscus, cartilage, heart muscle. All of this has been done in studies in the animal models. So soon they actually did 16 humans. They had 11-year-old infarcts. They had a heart attack, and they got scar tissue in their heart. And we were all taught that your heart will never function the same again after a heart attack. I mean, we all accepted it. They injected these 11 individuals with their stem cells. They went right into the heart muscle through the vein, just like they do a cardiac catheter. They injected it with stem cells. All 11 reduced that scar with regenerated cardiac muscle by 68%, which was huge. 2/3 of it regenerated new muscle. And that was with one treatment. So it's coming. We're going to have treatments that none of us thought were possible. When I tell you about regenerating the limb, it sounds like sci-fi. Back in 2000, when I was reading about stem cells and I met you and John, I didn't think I was ever going to see this in my lifetime. I didn't think that I would ever be able to treat. One of my sons just became a veterinarian this year. I was hoping and praying in their lifetime they'd be able to see these stem cells work. To me, it was like Star Trek. It truly was. And now we're doing it routinely. It'll be 3 treatments this week. One that came from New York with Lou Gehrig's and the dog. Another one that came locally with a cervical wobbler's disease that's incurable. And we have hope by giving stem cells. We're getting benefit from these dogs. We had one in Virginia Beach. She came up with her German Shepherd. She was originally from Pittsburgh, and her mother heard me on the radio. And she came up and wanted to know if I'd treat her dog with this Lou Gehrig's because they go downhill very quickly and they can't walk, and then their diaphragm goes paralyzed. And usually in 6 to 8 months, from when they start the clinical signs, the decision has to be made or it's going to be made for you. So they don't live very long. We treated her dog. Her dog was not able to walk. She sends me a video at the 60-day mark, and it looks like her dog's going up steps, but it was shaking like crazy. And I called her up and I said, Debbie, I said, it looks like your dog's going up the steps. She goes, he is. And I said, is there any chance? I said, that's amazing. I said, is there any chance you can get somebody to, not shake so much? She says, oh, I'm sorry. That was me. I was crying. And I said, never mind, I'll use your video, and I'm going to share that story, because even the vets are sitting there, oh my word. And to see that dog walk again. And that dog was alive and well 8 months after that. It did not die of Lou Gehrig's. It got a leptospirosis infection, just a horrible, out of a mud puddle, and died in the ER, unfortunately, just a freak accident. But it was still doing well with the stem cells. We have 5 other cases that are still walking. One of them is going on its 2nd year from Zelianopel. So it's amazing. And all of those cases were diagnosed, not by me, by a board-certified neurologist. Then everybody says, Mike, you got to write these up. I said, I hate to write. I don't mind speaking and sharing knowledge. I'm a full-time clinician. And I said, I'm just not going to write them up. And that's the sin. I should be writing it up as research, but I haven't. So it's not everybody gets to see it the way they want to see it.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is a lot of hope, and that gives people and your pets something to, be very grateful for. And the fact that Dr. Mike is here in Pittsburgh by choice because of the friendly nature of the region, and yet travels the world and has spoken all over the world about this, and has been one of the leading voices of stem cells for the planet, really. And let's hear a round of applause for Dr. Mike Hutchinson.
Thank you.
We're blessed to have you here, Doc.
Well, it's my pleasure. And again, I can't thank you enough for hosting.
So this is an opportunity, little Q&A, intimate setting. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So who wants to start?
I will. Knowing what you know about the stem cell research, are there any current studies, and what do you think the potential is for the diseases of dementia in humans?
So right now they're treating over in Greece, and I'm aware of these studies. I'm sure there's many more, but I happen to be aware of these studies. They're treating dementia with a stem cell that comes out of blood. It's not the MSC that they're using. They're using a higher level stem cell called a very small embryonic-like cell that they can get out of blood. So they're having some success with it. I'm not privy to the rest of those studies. I just know the early part of that. And I know a lot more since last night. I got the privilege of speaking to one of the demigods in this industry out of Melbourne, Australia, Dr. Vasilis Paspaliaris, that shared that with me and gave a personal story about his own father being treated. One of my friends was mother's benefited from that therapy as well. She's from Illinois, but she was fortunate enough to be able to travel around the world to get a treatment, her and her husband, and they got it. She couldn't get it in the United States, though, not yet, which is a shame.
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
That's obviously a big and growing issue.
There also is tremendous research going on with autism. There's tremendous research going on with Alzheimer's, and it's very, very promising. They're starting to figure this out. They're starting to be able to reverse whatever caused those brick-like plaques in the areas of the brain that produce dopamine and produce serotonin and all of those things. And so they're starting to figure it out. So no matter what damage and how it was caused, environmental or hereditary, however it was caused, they're starting to regenerate those areas in laboratory animals, and now they're doing the initial trials. And they're giving the cells through the nose, through a nasal spray. And they're getting so good at encapsulating these cells that the cells, instead of dying in 3 days and providing this powerful effect in the body, sometimes for 6 months, when they encapsulate them, they evade the immune system. The body doesn't reject them. They have little pores in them that can take in nutrients so they stay alive, and they have little pores that they can secrete all these good factors. And that's the effect that we're getting from these cells, and it's helping the dementia patients. So it's really, really compelling research that's going on, and I'm very, very close to it because there's so many friends of mine that have parents that are exhibiting early signs. We're getting at that age, unfortunately, that I'm starting to get asked that all the time. Very good question.
I donated my brain to science, and Doc gave it back. Yeah. So, any other questions? Brian?
Yeah.
From the Wyndham.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
I'm curious with the ALS and things like polymyositis and other autoimmune deficiencies. You mentioned it in dogs, which is awesome because we're looking actually to have insured for our dogs now. But why not humans? Why not so many test trials in humans for those?
Well, there is, and you can actually go and seek them out now because they're publishing the data from the early treatments and the early results that they're getting. There's a couple public companies out there that are having some good success. They're in phase 3 trials right now. That means phase 1 is safety, phase 2 is showing some efficacy, and phase 3 is going out to the mass market and showing more efficacy in a larger population of patients. And that's one of the things that's getting fast track approval because there's no treatment for it. I mean, Lou Gehrig, what was it, 1940s?
So back up in 2012, 2011.
Okay.
Was it prevalent then, or do you think that could have been done then?
No, the research was just starting, and I actually was asked to see if I could do a protocol. The Australians had done IV treatment only, and it wasn't getting dogs walking again. And I was working with the adipose stem cells first. Then I was asked to do IV, intravenous, and also into the acupuncture points along the spine. Maybe we slowed it down, but we didn't get any reversal signs. I never got a dog walking again. Then we started doing those two, IV into the muscles and the acupuncture points, and intrathecally into the cerebral spinal fluid, and we were slowing it down dramatically. We had dogs, instead of dying in 8 months, they were living to 12 months to 16 months, and that was the longest I got. So it was hope, but it wasn't the answer. Recently, I've been looking at the stem cells. I've been asked to look at them, and I accepted out of the blood the very small embryonic-like cells, and those are giving us a lot more hope for those kinds of diseases. So what's going to happen here, it's happening in animals, is that we're getting access to these cells from our own body. Now, think about getting a cell out of the blood. I could isolate the white blood cells and send them frozen anywhere in the United States, and you could use them tomorrow. I could isolate platelets and send them anywhere in the United States, use them tomorrow. I could isolate packed cells or whole blood from a universal donor, and you can go to a blood bank and get those cells. Well, think about it, that soon we're going to be able to isolate these high-power repair cells that are in our blood, and get this. Pittsburgh did a lot of this work, UPMC, where they took small or young rats and mice and tied the circulation to older rats, but they were genetically identical twins separated by time. So they weren't worried about rejection. So they had a 3-year-old rat, which is old, and a 1-year-old rat, which is considered young. 3-year-old rats are exhibiting brain dementia, and they couldn't do the mazes as well, and their cardiac function was down. Within 3 days of giving them the blood from the young rats, 3 days, they improved cardiac function and brain function by an average of 15%. That's huge. So there's some kind of youth factor that's in that young blood. So with the blood product, think about this. We can, my son, when he was in college, was donating his plasma as many times as he could to get some money. And pretty soon they'll be able to donate their stem cells to me or to you or to other people in need. And that would be pretty neat. And even if we use them just for anti-aging, there's nothing wrong with that. We're trying to help our body. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that.
So it looks like Johns Hopkins University, Cleveland Clinic, and those top universities.
And UPMC. Yeah.
UPMC as well.
Yeah.
They didn't have access back then, and it's now coming to the market, is what you're saying? It's now
I can share this because it's published now. Dr. Tlenko is one of the chief researchers at Johns Hopkins. He came up to my clinic. He actually went to Grove City College. I didn't know that until I was having lunch with him, but I met him at a conference in Miami. We were both speaking, and he said, Mike, how many animals have you done? And so he came over to watch me doing the procedure, and then we went to lunch, and at the time, he shared non-disclosure. I couldn't disclose the information. He shared the work they were doing, but they were working on end-stage Crohn's patients that had little, what we call perianal fistulas, which are extremely painful. These poor Crohn's patients were suffering miserably, not just feeling like they had to go to the bathroom all the time, but hurting badly, and the standard of care wasn't helping it. Well, I had treated those same perianal fistulas in dogs with a similar syndrome with adipose stem cells, and that anti-inflammatory and anti-modulatory effect of the immune system, they closed up. And I had never seen that in my career. So I shared that with him, and he said, we're doing it in stage 5 human patients with the same success. And now it's published. It went through stage 3, phase 3 trials. And I said, why are you waiting so long? Stage 5, what is that? He said, that's when everything else has failed. I said, do you know some people commit suicide before they get to that point? They're suffering so much. And I said, why in the world would you wait? They're suffering. They should have a choice. You should have a choice to get your own cells. He said, Mike, I couldn't agree with you more, but we can't do it. So they had to wait to stage 5 to treat those patients. And they were still getting the same results I saw in the dogs. And we treat the dogs immediately. You know, we treat dogs better sometimes than we're treating people. So yes, that technology and that knowledge was available in 2012, but they couldn't do it because we have FDA. And what's happened in Texas, they said, and I don't want to say they did this to the FDA, but they said, look, every patient...
the FDA.
Yeah. Every patient has the right to their own cells in a terminal situation. Well, define a terminal situation. Does that mean you're dying? Or does that mean the standard of care has failed and I don't want to get my knee chopped off? I don't want to get it replaced. I don't want to put an artificial knee. My son said to me, he says, Dad, in 10 years, because they're going to grow the knee, they're doing this in rabbits right now. They're doing this in animal models. You can go look at this online and see it. They're chopping out joints. They're doing a 3D imprint first. They're putting that scaffold in. They're growing the whole joint back. And then 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, the rabbits are hopping around like other rabbits a similar weight. 6 weeks later. And they're growing the joint. My son said, Dad, pretty soon they're going to think you guys were barbarians, cutting off the joints. And I said, well, I don't want to think of it that way. We're trying to help people in pain, or, that's the end point was to help people in pain. But nobody wants to get a joint replacement unless they absolutely have to. And now I would say, how about we give a biologic intervention? It's the only biologic intervention using our own repair cells and maybe buying time, 3, 4, 5 years, still feeling good. I have one of my associates, a technician, they had a knee replacement in her left leg. Her name's Sharon. She was on TV. Her dog got treated and did very well, so she wanted the treatment. And the technology came. She was the first patient in Pittsburgh. And July 1st, 3 years ago, it'll be 3 years, July 1st, she's zero pain. And she was so depressed from her pain. She was so crippled from her pain that she was ready to go through the second knee replacement within a year. She said, Mike, I have more problems with my knee, and she's dancing on her right knee. Zero. I said, come on, Sharon. 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10. She goes, Mike, 0. And then she starts dancing. And it's like, and that's the promise that we have available now, and nobody should say no to us. Nobody. To use our own cells for our own repair. And that's why I get passionate about it, because I get to see this. And dogs don't lie. They talk about placebo effects, and I can argue that all day. But when that dog can't go up the steps, or can't get in and out of the car, or can't stand in one place to go to the bathroom, and we treat them with stem cells, and this is a reasonable expectation. When I treat them with stem cells, on the cases that I pick, I have a reasonable expectation that in 3-4 weeks, they're going to be going up the steps, getting in and out of the car. We see it over and over and over again, and every other veterinarian around the world is getting the same results I'm getting. It's not just me. And it's lasting for a year and a half in a dog's life, or a cat's life. And so that's pretty cool. And we should have that option. I mean, all of us should have that option. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but...
Yeah, it sounds like the rats are chewing on the wires or something. You got me nervous for that rat thing. Now, what I'm hearing is we treat dogs better than humans, but enough about my wife. Yeah. No, I knew there was a dramatic, dynamic change in my relationship when my picture was replaced with our dog's picture in the master bedroom. That's a sign.
Yeah, I know. Right. It's like if we're in the boat, who's going first? Us.
We have any other questions? I'm sure we do.
Is there a limitation to regenerate cartilage in your knee?
Is there a limitation to regenerating cartridge in a knee?
Enough space in your knee for the cartilage to grow.
So you're
bone on bone.
Right, if you're bone on bone now.
Bone on bone, we call that stage 4. And in the studies, we're doing stage 2 and stage 3, so they're not bone on bone yet. We're working on a nanoscaffold cushion, if you will, that the surgeons can insert through a needle and be soaked with the stem cells and help protect. Because what happens when we did bone to bone, it started regenerating cartilage, but then it would wear because you have to do physical therapy. If you don't do physical therapy, it's not going to grow cartilage. And that's been shown over and over and over. So the minute you get, I tell everybody, I'm doing 50% of it giving stem cells. The other 50%'s on you. You've got to do the physical therapy. Immediately walk. Use your limb. Don't go play basketball right away. And that's the hard part, because people don't feel the pain. They start playing basketball, then they get tendonitis 6 weeks later. They haven't used their knee for 6 years, and then they say, "Oh, it's not working." And I said, "No. Does it hurt over here? Does it hurt over here?" Yeah. you went a little bit too fast, then you give them a little PRP injection, they feel better, and then they
The
go
bottom
slower.
line is it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible, but we're not there yet. And so, bone to bone, nobody's doing that trial. Dr. Wayne Thomas over in Sydney, Australia, is bugging me to do the sheep trial or the goat trial. And I said, Wayne, we have the opportunity to do a 200-patient funded trial in humans with possibly a major academic clinic. I can't say it yet because the agreements haven't been signed, but it's very, very close. I'm having a conversation tomorrow, I think the final conversation for our agreement, and we've had many, many meetings, so I'm getting really excited. I really think we're going to be on a fast-track pathway, and we'll be answering that question, and everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants to help the bone-to-bone, but we're not there yet. So there's hope, but not yet.
You had a question?
Yeah, so in your research, how long is it taking for stem cells to prolong your longevity?
Good question. So in dogs, it's about 60 days. We usually see the maximum effect. I've treated over 1,000, so I have seen a handful, and I mean a handful, take up to 120 days to see that effect. But the majority of them I see in 30 to 60 days. So we believe the profound effect 2 days later after we give stem cells is a profound anti-inflammatory effect. We know why. We know that the stem cells are secreting a major anti-inflammatory in our body, a natural anti-inflammatory. So everybody says, my dog's feeling so much better, and I go, great, don't overdo it. Let's see if we can keep that going, but I don't expect regeneration or benefit, maybe not regeneration, but prolonged benefit for 60 days. And so I have them come back at 30 days and 60 days. So that's what we expect in dogs. In people, it takes a little bit longer, but Sharon was one example, the tech that got the treatment. Day 3, she got up out of bed and forgot because she didn't have any pain. And I said, well, Sharon, it's going to come back if you overdo it. I promise you it's going to come back. She said I was wrong. She said it never came back. And that is not, that's a phenomenal result. We love that. That's not the norm. Usually it takes a little bit longer, and it can take up to 3-4 months. And it all is dependent on the physical therapy afterwards, because that helps direct the cells what to do. If you're not using the joint, it goes to supporting structures. If you're using the joint, it goes to the defects. And if you get what we call a chondral defect, where you get a wear in your knee, it's very, very painful, but it's not down to the bone yet. We call that a chondral defect. Those I love to treat in animals, because when I take x-rays a year later, I don't see the defect anymore, or it's smaller. University of Minnesota did a study, 355 dogs that ruptured their ACL ligaments, and they used 4 different techniques to repair them. And I only use one of those techniques, and I don't break the bone, I don't put a plate in, I use a nylon suture on the outside of the joint. Well, they did that with 1/4 of the dogs. They looked at those dogs a year later to see which ones had the most degeneration in their joint, because it's like, Jerome Bettis, when he injured his legs, you look at him a year later, and they went in there and did an arthroscopic surgery. A year later, he's got a lot more arthritis than he had a year before. It's going to degenerate quicker after that injury, or age quicker. So, and it's pain. Well, when they went back a year later, there was no statistical difference. And in 1/4 of that group, the treatment was medical management. They didn't do a surgery to stabilize it. And so I went up to the orthopedist, who's a very, very ethical man, and I said, boy, I wish you would have done this study on animals that got the repair and had the stem cells at the same time, and looked at them a year later. And he said, well, I was going to come to your talk tomorrow. I was hoping you could tell us. And I said, I'm a clinician. And he says, well, do you have maybe 10 dogs we can use for a proof of concept? I said, probably, because I do stem cell repairs. I'll call the clinic and see if they can get people to come in. We won't charge them, tell them what we're doing. Everybody said yes. And we got 14 dogs that were a year out of about a year and a couple months out of the surgery for the repair. And we looked at them. One of the dogs had advanced arthritis, worse than when we did it. They had stem cells. The other 13 had less or none. And I mean, on an x-ray. And I wasn't taking x-rays. I was just going by what the owners are telling me. Oh, your dog's feeling good. That's great. That's what we wanted to do. I wasn't taking x-rays. I was just a clinician. I didn't want to add expense to it. I just said, hey, your dog's doing great. Let's hope that keeps lasting. And if it doesn't, we have bank vials where we can call them back now. We don't have to do surgery, inject them again.
Like how often do you have to re-inject?
In dogs, it's about young dogs, about a year, year and a half. In older dogs, it goes longer because they're not as active. So it might be 2.5, 3 years. And so sometimes I'm faced with a decision, do we want to bank cells when they're 12? and a large breed dog, is it going to live to be 16? I don't know. And I'm always wrong. When I tell them, let's just give them all the cells today. And then, of course, 2.5 years later, geez, Doc, I wish we banked those cells. I said, well, we know now the dog's alive, but we didn't know back then if they're going to be alive in 2.5 years. So it's crystal ball stuff when you get to that point.
Well, the bottom line is you can teach old dogs new tricks.
Yeah.
That's the whole gist of this about stem cells, right?
Yeah.
Or rats.
Yeah.
Or cats, right?
Right.
Well, Dr. Mike Hutchinson, I know Doc is so generous with his time. I know he'll stay and continue to answer questions as long as he's up by 7:38 tomorrow.
So,
For our weekly visit, you sent us some questions I'll have to review.
some doozies.
Yeah, there's some good ones
They're real
in there.
questions. Every time it's questions that people email to me, and I send them a whole bunch of questions, and they pick what they want to do, and sometimes they don't pick any of the above, but that's okay.
We usually stick to the script, but we always seem to try to hit you with a bonus question.
Which I enjoy. I enjoy
Right.
the most. I enjoy the spontaneity, and half the time I don't know if they're joking or, it's a real question.
So, if you don't know, we want to thank the Talent Network, David and Frank, in putting Dr. Mike in a global platform.
Yeah.
And you can go to drmikehutchinson.com. He has over 30 now podcasts available with tremendous information. And that's at your fingertips. And, of course, animalgeneral.net, which we have a link to kdkradio.com. And every Thursday at 7:38 on KDK Radio. We appreciate our relationship. As you can see,
very mutual.
Doc's very passionate, very advanced, and the bottom line is he's excellent at answering people's questions because he cares so much about people and pets. And we're very blessed to have you in Pittsburgh. So let's hear it again for Dr. Mike Hutchinson. Thank you,
I'm
Doc.
humbled. Thank you. I'm very humbled. Just for your knowledge, on that podcast, I did 3 or 4, David, 3 or 4 podcasts on Stem Cell 101. And I promise you, if you just download those and listen to them in the car or at home or whatever on the computer, you will know more about all the different types of stem cells than 99% of the doctors. And I don't say that to insult my medical colleagues. They just don't know. And my son just graduated from veterinary school. He says, Dad, he knows about it because of me. He said, the poor kid, my whole family ad nauseum at the dinner table for the last, But he said, Dad, they're not teaching it in college yet. And that's a shame. They asked me to write a regenerative medicine course, and I said, I think I'd rather do it to the high school, advanced biology, because that's going to get them sparked. And guess what? They asked, I told you, they all put their hand up, do you think you'd be able to regenerate a limb in 10 years? Everybody had their hand up. When they asked questions, they couldn't answer any of them. I said, I hope your mind's going to help us answer that one day, because we need that. And my daughter was writing down the frequently asked questions that she does every time I speak, and she goes, I don't think you can answer any of those. And I said, I know, they don't have any limitation in their head. And they're not embarrassed to ask a question, which I love. Sometimes medical colleagues think they should know it, and I don't care if they know it or not. I'll answer it the best I can. And I spend an enormous amount of time talking to my colleagues, so I'm always happy to do that as well.
Thanks, brother.
Hey, thank you, Larry.
All right.
All right. Thank you.